Hey guys, tonight we're setting off on a journey into one of the worst years in human history. No, not 2020 though. Nice guess. We're going all the way back to the year 536. A year so bad that even professional historians who usually keep things cool and clinical have dubbed it the worst year to be alive. Picture this. You open your eyes one morning, stretch your arms, and wait, why is it still dark outside? Why does the air feel thick and wrong? And where did the sun go? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see the sleepy little history-loving pockets around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step outside expecting morning. Instead, you're greeted by a heavy gray fog that drapes the world like a damp funeral shroud. The sun, assuming it's even up there, is nothing more than a dim orange smear in the sky. Not just for a day, not even a week. For over a full year, that weak glow is all you get. Imagine living in permanent overcast, like the worst winter ever, but it's happening everywhere. Rome, China, Ireland, India, Ethiopia, the entire northern hemisphere plunged into cold gray gloom. Historians still argue whether it was one volcanic eruption or two that triggered this chaos. Some say Iceland blew its top. Others point to volcanoes in Central America or Indonesia. Whoever it was, they sure knew how to make an entrance. The eruption, or eruptions, spewed so much ash into the atmosphere that it created a massive veil of dust and sulfur. This wasn't just a bad weather week. This was a planetary dimmer switch set to doom. You shuffle through the village and everyone looks wrong, pale, gaunt, quiet. Conversations are whispers. No one knows what's going on. There's no radio to tune into, no Twitter threads blaming Mercury retrograde, just fear. Because when the sun disappears for months and crops don't grow and the seasons go out of sync, people panic. One ancient historian from Constantinople, Procopius, wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon. Kind of poetic until you realize he wasn't trying to be. That's literally what it looked like. And over in Ireland, monks noted that bread, failed meaning harvests, were bust for multiple years in a row. Meanwhile, in China, the records say yellow dust rained from the sky and snow fell in midsummer. You know things are dire when even Confucian scribes are logging weird weather instead of tea customs. Now let's talk temperatures. You'd think with all that ash in the air, it'd just be gloomy, but nope. It was freezing. Summer temperatures dropped by up to 5 degrees Celsius. That's nearly 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Doesn't sound like much. Try growing barley in that. Spoiler, you can't. In some places it snowed in August. Rivers froze in places where they'd never frozen before. This wasn't just a bad season. It was a climate crash. And no people didn't just throw on an extra cloak and ride it out. They starved. They got sick. They died. One Byzantine chronicler, Michael the Syrian, wrote that the fog lasted for 18 months and caused great suffering. You know, it's bad when even the church guys are getting dramatic. A quirky detail here, tree rings. Scientists today can look at the growth rings in ancient trees and actually see the year 536. The rings are unusually thin, signaling stunted growth. It's like the trees themselves are saying, "Yep, that year was the worst. Please never again." Add in layers of ash found in Greenland ice cores, and the evidence stacks up faster than firewood before a snowstorm. And of course, you can't separate this eerie darkness from human psychology. You're a medieval farmer already used to superstitions and omens. Now, the sky looks wrong. The crops fail. People die. What conclusion do you draw? Yep, the world's ending. Apocalypse bingo check. Religious leaders everywhere start preaching repentance. Others claim a demon swallowed the sun. You just try not to freeze to death and wonder if your turnips are cursed. And here's the kicker. No one had the context to understand it. No geology textbooks, no volcano alert system. You didn't even know what a volcano was. All you knew was the birds stopped singing, the rivers turned sluggish, and your neighbor's goat just keeled over from cold. Must be divine punishment, right? But here's something else amid all the doom and gloom. There's an eerie sort of unity. All across the hemisphere from Peru to Persia, people are looking at the same dead sky, suffering the same way. It's one of the rare moments in ancient history where humanity collectively flinched, like we all touched a cosmic stove at once. Even scholars today are spooked by it. Medieval historian Michael McCormick straight up called 536 the worst year to be alive. Not 1347 with the Black Death, not 1918 with Spanish flu, not even 2020. No, he picked 536, and honestly, it's hard to argue with him. So now you know why we're starting here. You're in a world darkened by volcanic ash chilled to the bone and wrapped in uncertainty. And you're going to have to find a way to make it through what's coming next. You wake up the next morning, or at least you think it's morning. The air inside your tiny home is cold, the kind of cold that creeps into your bones and sets up camp. Outside, the sky hasn't changed. Still that eerie, washed-out gray. Still no sign of the sun. You light a tallow candle to check the time, but honestly, you could be in the middle of the night or late afternoon. No one really knows anymore. Time's gotten fuzzy and not in the fun, cozy sweater way. When you step outside, the air smells odd, metallic, dry. The usual earthy scent of wet soil and plants is gone. What plants they've all either withered or failed to sprout. Your breath fogs in the air, even though it's supposed to be spring. People around you look up every now and then, staring into the sky like it owes them an apology. One old woman mutters a prayer. A man crosses himself and mutters something about the sun being eaten by spirits. And here's the unsettling part. That thick veil overhead isn't just blotting out light. It's also warping your sense of reality. Shadows are gone. The birds silent. There are no clear dawns or dusks, just a weird, never-ending dusk that bleeds into duskier dusk. Night falls, but it feels like it never really left. You lie awake longer than you should, because your brain doesn't get the memo that it's bedtime. Circadian rhythms. Broken. Ancient writers noticed it too. Cassiodorus, a Roman administrator, wrote about how the sun was dark and its darkness lasted for 18 months. The stars, he said, appeared at noon. Imagine trying to plant anything when your sun looks like a faint, dirty coin floating behind a foggy window. There's no heat, no brightness, no vitamin D, just permanent twilight and the gnawing sense that the world is off its axis. Historians still debate whether people in 536 thought the sun was literally dying. And really, who could blame them if they did? There's a moment where even the rational ones start to lose faith. After all, it wasn't just the sky. It was the effect on everything else. Your livestock are agitated, restless. The goats aren't breeding right, and the hens barely lay eggs. The rhythm of nature is gone, and without it, people lose their anchor. And then there's the psychological toll. You might think today's seasonal depression is bad, but try it medieval style, no artificial lights, no cozy therapy sessions, no vitamin gummies. Just endless gray and creeping despair. You see it in your neighbor's eyes. You hear it in the silence at mealtime. Even the local priest looks shaken during Mass. The sense that God has turned his face away is thick in the air. One odd little detail that pops up in ancient texts halos around the sun. These eerie rings, likely caused by ice crystals or volcanic dust, made the sun look like it was glowing unnaturally. Some saw it as divine warning, others witchcraft. You just want your vegetables to grow and your toes to stop going numb in the morning. By now, even animals are reacting. Dogs bark more often, seemingly at nothing. Wolves creep closer to villages hungry and emboldened. Mice chew through grain stores, desperate for anything to eat. Famine hasn't fully arrived yet, but it's knocking, and everyone hears it. In India, records mention a strange yellow fog hanging in the air, making it hard to breathe and casting a sickly tint on everything. In Japan, too, they recorded a mysterious darkness and unseasonal cold. The reach of this thing is massive, far beyond what anyone at the time could have guessed. And the worst part, no one can escape it. Rich, poor, noble peasant, everyone's sun is broken. And now you start hearing rumors, stories carried by merchants or monks from far-off lands, tales of people starving, of entire villages fleeing into the woods, of fields cursed by spirits. There's no Twitter, no radio, but word spreads like frost, slow cold and full of dread. And if you lived back then, you'd have no clue what caused it. Today, we know it was likely a massive volcanic eruption, or several. But in 536, you're left grasping at guesses. Was it punishment for sin? A dragon swallowing the sun? Did someone anger the gods? There's no clear answer, just the dark sky, the dying crops, and the deepening fear that maybe, just maybe, this is how the world ends. Of course, not everyone reacts with fear. Some lean into it. Apocalyptic sects start popping up. Charismatic leaders claim to know the cause, and more importantly, how to fix it. You watch as friends start fasting, praying, giving away their meager possessions. One man refuses to light any fires, believing the darkness is holy. Another moves into a cave to await divine judgment. There's a general sense of unraveling, like the social threads that held things together are starting to fray. And yet, even in this surreal twilight world, life stumbles forward. You still have to fetch water, still need to gather firewood, still have to milk the cow if she'll let you. But now, you do it all under that dim, wrong-colored sky, squinting into the gloom, and wondering when or if the sun will ever come back. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not the peaceful birds chirping kind. This silence is heavy. It hangs over the fields where nothing grows, presses into the still air around empty gardens, and fills your stomach like a stone. You walk to the edge of your plot, glance at your soil, and sigh. Nothing. Again. It's been weeks since the last edible sprout dared push its head above ground. The few that did were pale stunted, confused by the lack of sunlight and warmth. You tried planting early, then late, then not at all, just standing over the dirt and muttering encouragements. Didn't help. It's not just you. Everyone's crops are failing. barley, wheat, rye, all curled and wilted like they decided to give up. Which is ironic because that's exactly how everyone feels right now. Historians still argue whether this was the first real agricultural collapse of the post-Roman world, but you don't need scholarly consensus when your food supply is literally rotting in the ground. You know something is deeply cosmically wrong. Summer used to mean golden fields and sweaty backs. Now it means cold winds and clouds that don't bring rain, just gloom. You walk past a neighbor trying to turn compost in his patch. He stops when he sees you, shrugs, and points at a single drooping cabbage like it's the last unicorn. You both laugh a little. What else is there to do? Then you go home and divide the remaining beans in your pantry into painfully small piles. One for today, one for tomorrow, one, hopefully, for next week. There's a strange psychology to famine. At first, it's just discomfort. You miss your favorite meals, sure, but there's still food. You joke about smaller waistlines, but slowly the laughter fades. Your stomach starts to shrink. You chew slower to trick your brain. You wake up thinking about food and go to bed dreaming of bread. And remember, this isn't the modern world. No grocery stores. No backup rice in the cupboard. No government aid. If your crops don't grow, you don't eat. That's it. The end. Back in Constantinople, reports start coming in from rural provinces. Entire farms abandoned. Herds of cattle dead from cold and hunger. The emperor's granaries are emptying fast. Even the nobles start to notice their dinner tables aren't quite as lavish, the wine's a little thinner, the feasts less frequent. And in Ireland, monks record a haunting litany failure of bread from the years 536 to 539. That's 3 years of crop failure in a row. You can almost hear the scribes pausing between lines to swallow their own fear. Ireland, usually known for damp but fertile land, is suddenly producing little more than panic. Even in far-off China, the records show weird frost in August and snow in July. The emperor's court scrambles to make sense of it. Rituals are held. Altars are built. Scholars write reports full of flowery metaphors. But the rice won't grow. Not in those conditions. Meanwhile, you try to preserve what little you've got. You dry weeds, chew on boiled bark, mix acorns into your flour to stretch it further. Problem is, acorns have to be soaked and rinsed repeatedly to remove the bitter toxins. Miss a step, and congratulations, you've just given your family a mild case of poisoning. And still, it's better than eating nothing. That weird soup your neighbor made yesterday, it wasn't delicious. It was desperation in a bowl. Dandelion roots, leftover onion, peels of pigeon feather that snuck in by accident. He said it added texture. You pretended to agree. Food becomes currency. A single egg is worth days of labor. A handful of grain is hoarded like gold. People start hiding their stores, even from friends, especially from friends. And every now and then, someone disappears. You hear whispers. They went to the forest to forage. They went to the river to fish. But deep down, you know what really happened. The hunger got them, and you're not just battling nature. You're battling other people. Theft becomes common. Grain bins are raided. Small fences around gardens suddenly have sharp stakes. Even inside villages, trust starts to crack. It's survival mode, and it's not pretty. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some places, people reportedly ate clay. Yep, actual dirt. It was believed to fill the belly and ease the hunger pangs. Spoiler, it didn't work. But it says a lot about what people were willing to try when their bodies screamed for calories. Meat. Forget it. Livestock were either eaten early on or died from the cold. Any surviving animals are guarded like royal heirs. If you hear a chicken clucking somewhere, you're listening to the sound of luxury. Milk. Maybe a few drops if the goats haven't frozen their udders off. Children suffer worst. Their bodies are small, still growing, not built for deprivation. They cry at night not just from hunger, but from confusion. Why can't we eat mama? And you don't have an answer. So you give them water and stroke their hair and hope they sleep through the worst of it. Historians believe that in some areas the population declined by up to 50%. That's not from war. That's just from hunger and cold. Silent killers. Slow, unrelenting. And yet you persist. You barter. You tighten belts. You find wild herbs and edible roots. You learn tricks your grandmother used to talk about, like using old flour and ash to make a passable biscuit. You learn how long you can go without a full meal. You learn that hunger has levels. It's not one feeling. It's a symphony of aches, foggy thoughts, bad dreams, and fatigue. And somehow, your village endures. Some don't make it, but some do. Because humans are maddeningly stubborn. And because even in the worst year imaginable, even when the world seems to be dying, you're still here, still trying. By now, you've forgotten what a full belly feels like. Hunger is your constant companion, a gnawing invisible creature that settles in your gut and refuses to leave. But it's not just about being hungry anymore. It's about what happens when entire communities run out of food. When you walk into the village square and hear not laughter or trade, but silence. A cold, brittle silence that sounds too much like fear. Today, the baker didn't open his shutters. You know why. There's no more flour. The last loaf went to the Reeves family 2 days ago in exchange for a single chicken, and no one's seen that chicken since. Someone tried to grind dried beans into flour, but it turned into paste, then mold. Others are chewing bark, literally, stripping trees of anything remotely fibrous and boiling it into broth. Does it taste like soup? No. It tastes like bark. But if you're lucky, it fills your stomach just enough to quiet the dizziness. The famine has moved past uncomfortable and into desperate. A peasant girl was caught stealing turnips from the Lord's field. They say she was whipped and tied to the stocks. But you wonder, did she even get to eat one first? You hope so. It's a grim thought, but that's where your mind lives now. Historians still argue whether the famine of the late 530s was the worst since the fall of Rome. But let's be honest, if you're living it, rankings don't matter. All you know is that people are dying. First, the weak, the sick, the elderly, then the young, then people who looked perfectly fine yesterday. You stop trusting your own body. A little chill might be the start of something. A skipped meal might be the one that finally tips you over the edge. Some towns try to ration food officially. There are tokens ledgers, meetings under flickering torchlight. It feels noble at first, everyone working together. But eventually, someone breaks. Someone hides a sack of oats. Someone barters for salted fish behind the chapel. Then another, someone finds out and demands a share. Fists fly. Knives come out. Trust dissolves like stale breadcrumbs in water. And if you think it can't get worse, here comes the rot. With no proper food preservation, what little stores remain begin to spoil. Grain goes moldy. Meat, if you had any, turns sour. Root vegetables shrivel and blacken in the cold. Rats get braver. They dart through storage rooms, gnawing at sacks and leaving behind droppings. You slap one with a broom, and it just hisses like it owns the place. You consider catching it for dinner. But you're not quite there yet. You start noticing people shrinking. Not literally, but their clothes hang looser, their cheeks hollow out. Children's heads look too big for their bodies. You see people stop mid-step to lean on a wall. Eyes, glassy. And always there's coughing. Low, dry, persistent. A warning bell with no clapper. And then you hear about the cities. Constantinople is in crisis. Alexandria, Damascus, Antioch, they're all reporting shortages. Monasteries are overwhelmed. Even merchants are struggling. Trade routes are empty. Nobody's selling grain because nobody has it. The famine isn't a local tragedy anymore. It's a continental one, maybe global. But you don't have maps. You just have rumors. In some places, people begin eating clay mixed with flour. In others, shoe leather. In truly desperate corners, whispers begin to stir. Whispers about people who went missing. About a pot someone saw boiling that didn't smell like any animal. You pretend not to hear. But deep down, you wonder if your child were starving, what would you do? Let's back away from that thought. A quirky historical note here in parts of Scandinavia, archaeologists found evidence of grain caches deliberately hidden during this period, buried in clay pots sealed under rock. Signs that some people at least were trying to plan for the worst. Whether they lived long enough to dig them up again, that part's murky. You hear more prayers these days, more confessions. Even the toughest farmers start visiting the chapel again, not out of faith, out of fear. The priest holds more power now, even as his own robes hang looser than usual. Every Sunday, he stands up and tries to reassure you. This is a test, he says. The righteous will be rewarded. You nod, but your stomach growls too loudly to care about righteousness. You try gardening inside your home. You put a few seeds in clay pots, leave them near the fire, hope they sprout. They don't. There's just not enough light, or warmth, or hope. One morning, you find your neighbor's door ajar. He hasn't been seen in days. You peek in and find nothing but a cold hearth and a half-eaten piece of wood. You leave quietly. What else is there to do? And yet life stumbles forward. Because it has to. You wake up each day and check your stores. You chew slowly. You drink extra water to feel full. You try not to cry when someone offers you a spoonful of soup that tastes like boiled weeds. It's not generosity. It's survival math. If they share now, maybe you'll share later. Maybe. And in all this, you still find tiny moments of humanity. A mother shares her crust of bread with a stranger. A child gives a wilted onion to an old man. Someone hums a song you haven't heard since childhood. You sit in the dark and whisper old stories just to remind yourself that people are still people even in the worst of times. And somehow, you make it through another day. Just when you think things can't possibly get worse, when the crops have failed, the sky refuses to brighten, and famine grips your entire village, something new arrives. Not a miracle, not relief, but a ship. And on that ship, death in the form of tiny stowaways with a taste for blood. Rats, fleas, disease. Welcome to the next act in this slow-burning apocalypse, the plague of Justinian. You don't know the word bacteria. You've never heard of Yersinia pestis. But you know what sickness looks like, and this one is different. It starts with a few people in the harbor town getting fevers. Then black lumps swell in their necks, armpits, and groins. Then screaming, lots of screaming. You hear the word curse passed around like a prayer. In reality, what's happening is a full-blown bubonic plague. It's the first pandemic of its kind in recorded history, and you lucky you are living right in the middle of it. Most historians agree it began in 541 CE, just a few years after the volcanic veil first dimmed the world. But remember, people and goods still moved, especially along the Mediterranean. Ships carrying grain from Egypt also carried infected fleas. And the fleas, they did what fleas do. They jumped, they bit, and they infected. Soon, Constantinople is overrun. Emperor Justinian himself catches it and nearly dies. Bodies pile up so fast that entire neighborhoods become impromptu cemeteries. Grave diggers refuse to work. Priests lose count of the dead. Justinian orders mass burials in huge pits where the corpses are layered like firewood. Historians still argue about how many died. Some say tens of millions over several waves. Others think it's less, but even the most conservative numbers are chilling. By the end of it, maybe a third to half of the Eastern Roman Empire's population is gone. But you don't need math to understand it. You just need to walk down your street. The plague reaches your town slower, carried by merchants or returning travelers. Maybe even a priest from a distant monastery. One day, someone in your village coughs. Then they collapse. A few days later, another. Then 5. You start hearing more bells than usual, one for every soul lost. The symptoms are terrifying. People swell with pus-filled buboes the size of apples. Their skin darkens. Some babble nonsense. Others scream until they go silent. The lucky ones die fast. The unlucky ones linger, leaking and hallucinating. You try herbs, prayers, potions made from garlic and vinegar. Some burn incense to cleanse the air. Others light fires in the streets, believing smoke will drive the sickness away. None of it works. One scholar in Constantinople described bodies left in the open, in houses on the road, even inside wells. Imagine needing a drink and realizing your water source is now a grave. And amidst it all, the emperor continues to tax the dead. No, really. Justinian refuses to halt tax collection, even when half the taxpayers are rotting in carts. His dream was to restore Rome's former glory. But now his empire is crumbling under ash, famine, and plague. But let's get personal again. You've survived the dark sky. You've rationed food until you forgot what hunger-free felt like. And now you're trying not to breathe near anyone. You clutch a bundle of herbs to your face because someone said it might help. You sleep further from your family just in case. You bury your neighbors and wash your hands with stale wine. Anything to stay clean. Anything to stay alive. Some villagers flee to the forests, hoping to escape the infection. But the plague follows. It always follows. Rats don't care about geography. Fleas don't honor social distancing. And medicine, if you can call it that, is mostly guesswork and superstition. You hear one man suggest draining the buboes with a knife. Another says you should smear dung on them. You pass. Even the church is unsure how to spin this. Some priests call it divine punishment. Others say it's a test of faith. Some just stop showing up. In the monastery nearby, monks begin chanting day and night. They won't open their doors to anyone, not out of fear, but because half of them are already dead. But here's the cruelest part. The plague doesn't care who you are, rich or poor, young or old, righteous or sinner. If the flea bites, that's it. You've got a few days, maybe less. Still, you keep going. You boil your drinking water, even though it tastes like ash. You bury the dead with scraps of cloth. You say quiet prayers when no one's listening. You whisper to your children at night, telling them it's going to be okay, even though you're not sure anymore. A strange quiet takes over. The village no longer bustles. There are fewer dogs barking, fewer footsteps. The air feels heavy with the absence of life. And yet, even in the bleakest moments, something strange happens. You adapt. You learn to recognize the early signs. You burn the belongings of the infected. You stop shaking hands. You leave food outside doors instead of delivering it inside. These are proto-quarantine measures, even if you don't have a name for them. And eventually, miraculously, the wave passes. The fevered stop collapsing. The air begins to clear. There are more birds again, more babies crying, more signs that life somehow still insists on returning. But now your village is smaller. Your heart is heavier. And the sky above you still refuses to fully brighten. You've survived the hunger. And now you've survived the plague. But what comes next? You might have thought that emperors and kings would be spared the worst of it. That behind marble walls and gold-threaded curtains, the great would feast and laugh and shrug off the misery outside. But in the year 536, and the grim years that followed, even the highest thrones trembled. In the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Justinian Nightmare sits on one of the most powerful seats in the world, or at least he used to. His grand dream was to rebuild the Roman Empire to stitch the glory of Caesar back together with faith law and a frightening amount of tax collection. He had generals, he had ambition, he had Constantinople. And then, everything went sideways. First came the darkness. The skies dimmed, the harvest failed, and whispers of doom crept into the palace halls. Then came the plague sweeping through the empire like a sickle through grain. Even Justinian himself wasn't spared. One day he's giving orders. The next, he's in bed with a fever so high the court starts preparing succession plans. Spoiler, he survives. Barely. But the damage is already done. You're not in Constantinople, of course, but the ripples reach you anyway. You hear tales from wandering monks and passing traders. The great emperor reduced to a sweating, shaking shadow of himself. His officials dead or fleeing. The streets of the mighty capital filled with corpses, the air thick with incense and despair. Historians still debate whether Justinian's reign ever truly recovered. He pushed on issuing laws, building the Hagia Sophia, dreaming of conquest. But his empire was bleeding. The armies were starving. The economy cracked like thin ice under too many feet. His once glorious reconquest campaigns in Italy stalled out. His treasury drained not just by war, but by plague burials and famine relief. And you live in his world, even if you never see his face. The roads aren't safe. The tax collectors still come, but there's nothing left to take. The coins have his name on them, but they buy less and less. And the roads that once buzzed with merchants and pilgrims are now eerily quiet. Meanwhile, law and order fray like an old tunic. Local warlords rise. Some lords abandon their manners. The empire's grip loosens especially in the rural fringes where you live. You once paid a small tribute to the empire and in return got protection. Now you pay more and get nothing except the occasional passing soldier who helps himself to your stew. Even the church starts shifting. Bishops take on roles that once belonged to governors. The local abbot mediates land disputes. Monasteries become sanctuaries, food banks, schools. The state is too busy burning to keep its promises, so faith fills the void, sometimes with hope, sometimes with fear. Let's talk about your world for a moment. You don't really care whether Justinian conquers Italy. You care whether your fence holds against wolves, whether your child's cough is just a cough, whether your two remaining chickens survive the winter. But you feel the decay of power like a slow rot. Less law, more bandits. Less structure, more suspicion. A quirky little fact: Justinian's own laws from earlier in his reign, those majestic Latin-heavy codes meant to organize and uplift the empire, end up being used to justify more taxes during the famine. Because apparently, even during the apocalypse, someone's got to fund the bureaucracy. You'd laugh if you weren't so tired. You hear rumors that the emperor, now recovered from his plague, believes God spared him for a reason. He doubles down on church building, writes religious doctrines, and starts seeing himself less as a ruler and more as a divine instrument. Which, to be honest, feels a bit much considering people are still chewing bark to survive. But it's not just Byzantium that's buckling. Other kingdoms begin to feel the strain too. The Western world, already fragile after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, is thrown into deeper chaos. Trade between cities slows to a crawl. Coinage vanishes from some regions entirely. You start bartering again. Goat cheese for wool, a dented pot for dried herbs. It feels older than the empire itself, like civilization is rewinding. Scholars today argue about whether this moment truly marks the start of the so-called Dark Ages. But for you, it's not a debate. It's your daily reality. Roads that once connected towns now crumble. Teachers stop teaching. Builders stop building. People stop dreaming. And still, the empire staggers forward. Justinian doesn't give up. He rebuilds some cities. He sends generals into battle. He holds on to power for nearly 40 years, which, considering everything, is frankly miraculous. But his world has shrunk. His dreams cost too much. The population is a shadow of what it was. The empire is a skeleton in gilded armor, still impressive, but brittle. One night around your village fire, someone tells a story about how the emperor made a new law just last month. You raise an eyebrow. What law? The one about grain shipments, they say. You laugh. Grain. What grain? And you all chuckle in that hollow, ironic way people do when there's nothing left but humor. The empire was supposed to protect you. It was supposed to be strong, eternal. But now it feels like a distant story, a tale of marble halls and fancy robes, while the real world freezes and starves. And yet, you still feel its echoes, the weight of its legacy, the absurdity of its tax system, the strange pride when someone mentions that you are technically a Roman citizen despite living in a half-rotted hut next to a goat who thinks she owns the place. So yes, Justinian's dream is faltering. The plague has ravaged his people. The darkness still clouds the sky, but somehow, the machine of empire lurches onward, wheels, squeaking gears, grinding powered by inertia, and the desperate belief that anything can still be saved. The news arrives slowly, like everything does these days. A trader passing through your village mentions that a kingdom in the west has collapsed. Again, you've never heard of it. Probably couldn't point to it on a map, even if you had one. But the tone in his voice tells you it matters. Europe isn't just suffering, it's unraveling. The Western Roman Empire had already fallen by this point, splintering into fragments and warlord states. But in the wake of 536 and the disasters that follow, even those fragments start to decay. Roads vanish under weeds. Towns empty out. Whole regions go quiet. Like someone just pressed mute on an entire continent. You don't hear the term Dark Ages, of course. That'll come centuries later, coined by scholars who never had to scrape mold off barley bread or trade a worn-out boot for a spoonful of grain. But you feel it. Every day. In the stillness. In the isolation. In the way letters stop arriving because no one's writing them anymore. And it's not just you. Across what used to be the Roman West, libraries are abandoned. Workshops close. Trade routes dry up. Literacy plummets. Monasteries become the only places left where people can read, write, or even remember what came before. You might not know Latin, but you know silence, and you can feel it spreading. Historians still debate whether this collapse was inevitable, or if 536 simply lit the match on a pile of dry kindling. Either way, the effect is the same. Imagine a quilt that's been carefully stitched together over centuries, roads, laws, towns, customs, and now imagine someone yanking out thread after thread. The quilt frays, then falls apart. In your village, the signs are subtle but unmistakable. The tanner moved away last spring. No one knows where. The carpenter stopped taking commissions. He's too busy trying to grow beans in soil that just won't cooperate. The smith sharpens what few tools are left, but hasn't made anything new in months. Why bother? No one can pay him anyway. You remember when traveling performers came through once a year. A juggler, a puppet show, music. You haven't seen them in what feels like forever. Entertainment now is a warm fire, a good story, and the miracle of not coughing yourself into the grave. Markets that once brought people together from across counties are smaller, quieter. No saffron, no dates, no fine cloth from the east. Just potatoes, onions when there are any, and worn faces bartering spoons for soup bones. One trader offers a single wool cloak for 3 chickens. Everyone laughs. He doesn't. Even religion feels different. The churches still hold service, but the sermons are darker now. More fire and brimstone. Less celebration, more endurance. You get the sense the priests are scared too, though they try not to show it. One openly wonders if this is the punishment foretold in Revelation. The sky is wrong, he says. The ground is cursed. You nod, but only because it's easier than arguing. And then there's the weird part. Time feels broken. Days blur. Seasons blend. You try to keep track by carving notches into the doorpost. But what's the point? There's no school, no festivals, no royal birthdays. Just cold hunger and a gnawing sense that the world used to be more vibrant, alive. Back when the Romans ruled, people could travel from Spain to Syria on a single network of roads. Now you're not even sure if the next village still exists. Maybe it was swallowed by the forest. Maybe bandits took over. Maybe it's just empty. And that forest, it's creeping closer. You swear the tree line wasn't that near last year. Buildings crumble. Roofs collapse. No one has time to maintain them. Nature doesn't wait. Trees root in old stone. Vines claw their way over temples. Civilization is retreating one step at a time. A quirky historical tidbit, some villages even forgot they were part of a kingdom. They just operated on their own, electing local elders, solving problems internally. Feudalism hadn't fully taken shape yet, but this strange in-between world was laying its foundations. You don't serve a king, you serve the guy with the biggest barn and the sharpest axe. Cultural memory gets fuzzy. People forget Roman engineering. Aqueducts break, and no one knows how to fix them. Roads buckle and go unused. The knowledge isn't destroyed, it's just ignored. Stored in monasteries locked behind Latin, waiting for someone curious enough to rediscover it centuries later. And yet you still wake up each day, still try to coax life from the soil, still barter and beg and band together with neighbors. Because collapse doesn't look like explosions or armies. It looks like apathy, like the slow fading of memory, like people saying, that's just how things are now, until one day they can't even remember what it was like before. Sometimes around the fire, an old man talks about the way things used to be. Heated baths, white stone buildings, candles that didn't smoke. You ask him how he knows, and he says, "My father told me." You nod. It sounds like a fairy tale, but you believe him. Because somewhere deep inside, you feel it too, that haunting sense that once the world was bright and busy and brilliant. And now, it's just surviving. Barely. Your breath fogs in the morning air, even though it's supposed to be midsummer. The chickens aren't laying. The well tastes metallic. But today's unease doesn't come from the sky, or the ground it rides in, with the next traveler a merchant from far, far east. His robes are tattered, his feet cracked and swollen, but his eyes tell the story. Before his words do, China has fallen into chaos. You sit with him by the fire, sharing weak broth and listening. He speaks of storms in the south, of snow in the wrong seasons, of rice paddies left dry and abandoned. The Sui dynasty hasn't risen yet. The Liang is fading. In between, famine, rebellion. The same story you've been living told in a different tongue across a different continent. Even in your own broken corner of the world, it's jarring to think of the mighty empires of the East suffering the same way. But that's the thing about the year 536 and the dark veil it cast over the planet. It didn't play favorites. China, with its grand capitals and ancient scholars, faced the same cold, the same crop failures, the same confusion. Historians still argue whether the Chinese records from this period describe the exact same atmospheric events as the ones noted in Europe and the Middle East. But the parallels are eerie. In the Book of Sui, there's mention of a yellow dust clouding the sky, crops failing, people dying, a royal court in disarray, unsure how to explain nature's betrayal. One Chinese astronomer writes of the sun losing its brilliance. Another scroll describes floods in one region, drought in the next, rice harvests down, wheat harvests missing entirely. And in an empire where good governance was supposed to harmonize heaven and earth, this meant the emperor had failed. You stir the soup slowly and imagine across the mountains and deserts a farmer in the Yangtze Valley doing the same thing, boiling tree bark, chewing sour leaves, rationing rice grain by grain. You've never met him. You never will. But his story rhymes with yours. And then there's the superstition. China, like every culture of the time, sees signs in the sky. Eclipses, comets, strange fog. These aren't just weather. They're omens. A bad harvest isn't just bad luck. It's heaven's way of sending a memo. And heaven, apparently furious. You're not sure whether to be comforted or horrified by this global synchronicity. On the one hand, you're not alone. On the other hand, you're really not alone. Everyone is falling apart together. The merchant speaks of uprisings, peasants rebelling against governors, bandits seizing grain stores. Not so different from the rumors you've heard about Gaul or Iberia. desperation doesn't wear national colors. It wears empty bellies and cold skin. A quirky tidbit. During this period, some Chinese communities reportedly turned to geomancy, trying to balance their villages by rearranging furniture, painting walls red, or realigning gates. If the sky was angry, maybe the earth could help soothe it. You glance around your own cottage and wonder if moving your chair might help. Worth a shot. And it's not just famine. The merchant talks about illnesses. Too strange. Fevers people, dropping where they stand, temples filling with incense smoke and coughing. Maybe not the same plague that hit Constantinople, but something. A sickness that creeps quiet and cruel. Trade slows. Silk caravans vanish. Ceramics stop arriving. Tea becomes a story instead of a commodity. And all this before the Sui unify the realm again. Before the Tang bring poetry and splendor. Right now, it's just the gap between dynasties, the hollow space between empires, and it's full of ghosts. You ask the merchant if there's any place that's thriving. Any corner of the world spared, he thinks. Then shakes his head. No, not that he's seen. The dark sky has turned the entire northern hemisphere into a patchwork of suffering. And even if you don't know the science behind it, no one does. It's hard to shake the feeling that the earth itself has tilted, gone askew. You thank the merchant, give him a dry heel of bread, and wish him luck on the road ahead. He nods and continues westward. And you sit for a long time staring into the fire, realizing that even in the farthest lands you've only ever heard whispers about the same gray hangs overhead. The same fear settles in chests. The same hunger gnaws at bones. And yet people go on. Across Asia, as in Europe, as in Africa, people still get up, still try to harvest what little they can, still tell stories to their children, still squint into the sky, wondering when, if ever, the sun will come back. Another traveler arrives, but this one's wearing a thick sand-blasted cloak and speaks with the flowing cadence of Persia. He brings more bad news, not that you were expecting anything cheerful. From the east, once more, a different empire is coming undone. The Sassanid Persians, guardians of Zoroastrian fire temples, and the mighty cities of Ctesiphon and Nishapur are staggering under the same weight that's been crushing you. The Sassanid Empire, proud rival to Byzantium, isn't doing much better. The darkness, the cold, the ruined harvests, they didn't skip Iran. If anything, they hit it just as hard. According to the traveler, the sun vanished from Persian skies the same way it vanished from yours. The royal fires symbolic of divine favor began to burn less brightly. A few were even extinguished. You don't need to know their theology to understand what that meant. In a faith built on balanced light versus dark good versus evil, having your sacred fire go dim is not just a bad omen. It's a catastrophe. You sip thin tea as he tells it. Noble families hoarded food. Soldiers deserted their posts. Bandits flourished in mountain passes. Zoroastrian priests debated what this darkness meant. Some said it was Ahriman, the spirit of destruction, finally gaining ground. Others claimed a celestial misalignment, a divine punishment, a warning. Historians still argue whether the empire's troubles during this period were directly caused by environmental collapse or if they simply amplified pre-existing problems. But what's not up for debate is this: the Sassanids suffered. Their economy, once vibrant with silk, silver, and spices, slowed to a crawl. Their border regions, especially in Armenia and Central Asia, became harder to manage. Communication broke down. Local lords got bold. And much like you, Persian villagers turned inward. Trade halted. Travel became dangerous. People who once relied on caravan routes now lived off whatever they could scavenge from increasingly barren land. Sound familiar? A quirky footnote here in Sassanid cosmology: eclipses and planetary misbehavior were tied to chaos and corruption in the world. Astrologers scrambled to explain the skies pouring over charts, while the people below starved and froze. One court advisor reportedly suggested sacrificing livestock to placate the heavens. But by then, there weren't many animals left to offer. Back in your part of the world, you wonder if the same gods are speaking through every cloud. If Persia's sacred fire can flicker, if Rome's emperor can nearly die from plague, then who are you supposed to turn to? The traveler tells you of a town that tried building a fire temple on a hilltop, hoping to call the light back. But no fire lasted long. Winds howled it out. Ashes blew like curses through the streets. Eventually, they stopped trying. Even royal cities like Ctesiphon weren't safe. He says the markets were half empty. The scent of spices had faded, replaced with wood smoke and fear. Temples stood tall, but fewer came to pray. Fewer could walk that far. He's quiet for a moment. Then he says something that sticks in your ribs. Even the mountains seem sad. You know what he means? Lately, even the trees seem quieter. The wind colder. The birds less bold. The collapse in Persia didn't happen all at once. Empires rarely fall in a single year. But the years following 536 laid the groundwork. When things are already tense, it doesn't take much to knock everything sideways. And a dying sun, that's more than enough. By the time you finish your tea, you realize just how vast this catastrophe really is. You used to think of Persia as a place of myth: gold domes, elaborate robes, gardens full of poetry and peacocks. Now you picture it as a mirror. Same cold, same dread, same ache in the stomach. You thank the traveler for his stories and offer him a blanket. He looks surprised, then grateful. Hospitality hasn't frozen completely out of the world, not yet. And when he leaves, the next morning, heading west this time, you stand a little longer in the cold, watching the gray sky, imagining a Persian farmer like you, wrapping his tunic tighter against the wind, walking into a village where the temples burn less brightly, wondering how long an empire can last when even the sacred fires start to fail. You wake before the sun, if you can even call it that anymore. There's no golden sunrise, no pink clouds or warming rays. Just that same dull, washed-out light that creeps into your cottage like it's apologizing for existing. You shuffle outside, wrapped in every scrap of wool and linen you own, but the cold still bites through. It's summer, supposedly, yet your breath comes in clouds, and frost clings to the thatch like it's late October. Welcome to the year 537, or 538. Honestly, you've lost track. This isn't just a freak cold snap. This is the second or third year in a row where summer has refused to show up. You remember what summer used to feel like: sweaty backs, buzzing flies, bare feet on warm soil. Now you wear layers to bed and hope the morning doesn't bring sleet. Children are sick more often. Joints ache like it's the dead of winter. And nothing grows. Still, historians now refer to this period as a volcanic winter. Back then, nobody knew the cause. But today's scientists believe that a massive eruption, likely in Iceland or somewhere in the tropics, threw so much sulfur and ash into the atmosphere that it blocked sunlight worldwide. Modern studies of ice cores confirm this chilling truth. Around 536, something big went boom, and the planet entered a years-long cold spell. But you don't need a geology degree to feel it in your bones. You try lighting a fire, but the wood's damp. It smokes and spits. The chimney barely draws. You huddle near it anyway, hands trembling, as you hold a cup of lukewarm broth. Outside, your goat bleats miserably. You check her stall, she's shivering too. You toss her a few frozen leaves and hope there'll be enough. Every now and then, the wind shifts just right, and you smell it again, that faint sulfuric tang in the air. Not strong, not constant, but strange. Not like any winter you've known. It's as if the world is exhaling something it shouldn't be. The children ask why it's still so cold. You make up stories. Sun spirits, asleep clouds made from sorrow. Ancient dragons dreaming in the mountains. Anything but the truth, which is you don't know. No one does. You remember a time when your village held summer festivals. Dancing bonfires, roasted meats, flower wreaths. Now the village green is barren. No music, no laughter. Just the occasional cough, echoing off cold stones. A quirky historical note tree rings from this period, show stunted growth across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Even trees were like, nope, not growing this year. It's the botanical equivalent of curling up under a blanket and waiting for the nightmare to end. Back in Constantinople, officials try to control food distribution, but their granaries are empty. In Gaul, farmers abandon fields entirely. In Ireland, monks document a failure of bread for 3 years. In Mesoamerica, even the Maya experience crop failures. This isn't local. This is planetary, and you're right in the middle of it. You go to fetch water from the well, and your fingers go numb holding the bucket. A neighbor's boy slipped on frozen mud last week and broke his leg. There's no doctor, no splint, just prayers and rest. He's feverish now. You hope he pulls through. And sleep, forget it. You can't get warm. You lie awake under scratchy blankets, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. Your dreams are restless. Images of snow in July, of fields of ice of the sun falling from the sky. You wake in a sweat, only to find your breath still misting the air. Historians still debate how much of the population was lost during these cold years. Some estimate 30% in certain regions. Not all from starvation or plague. Some just gave up. Stopped eating. Stopped talking. Slipped away like smoke. You try to keep your spirits up. You tell jokes by candlelight. Share thin stews and flatter them as delicate cuisine. Your neighbor calls his patchy cloak a new fashion, trend translucent rustic. You laugh even though your lips crack when you smile. Hope becomes a kind of currency, the rarest one. And then there's the animals. They're not built for this either. Calves born too small, chickens confused by the light. Even the wolves seem thinner, more desperate. They creep closer to the village at night. You keep your fire going, not just for warmth, but to keep the shadows back. The worst part, you stop trusting the seasons. You plant when it warms for a few days, only to watch a hard frost kill everything overnight. You try again and again. And each time, the earth gives you less in return. The calendar says it's summer. But you don't believe it. By now, you've stopped waiting for the sun to come back. It's not just the cold anymore, it's the light itself. Even when the skies clear and the clouds part, what shines through isn't warm golden daylight. It's a weak, washed-out imitation of the sun. Like someone smeared ash over the sky and dimmed the world's brightness by half. and noon. It doesn't look like noon. It looks like dusk. A weird, hazy yellow-gray gloom, as if the day can't quite commit to waking up. You remember when shadows used to be sharp. Now they're barely there, diffused into nothingness. Your eyes strain, your head aches, and even birds seem confused, chirping at odd hours, or going silent altogether. It's not your imagination. Across the Mediterranean, scribes note a sun without rays. In Syria, the chronicler John of Ephesus writes that the sun gave no light as the moon. In China, astronomers note the dimming too. All across the known world, people stare at the sky and wonder what terrible thing they've done to deserve this. Historians still argue whether this was entirely from volcanic ash or a combination of ash and climate shifts triggered by multiple eruptions. Some even suggest an extraterrestrial impact might have contributed. But back then, all anyone knew was that the heavens were acting strange. And that never bodes well. You shield your eyes at midday, not because it's bright, but because it's wrong. The color is off. The heat is gone. You can look at the sun for a few seconds without squinting, and that fact alone chills you more than the wind ever could. Night isn't much better. The moon, when it shows, glows an eerie blue. Not silver, not white. Blue. Even the stars seem duller, as if the very fabric of the universe is losing its luster. You hear old women whisper about prophecies about omens written in the sky. Some say the end times are near. Others say they're already here. There's a rumor that snow has fallen in Mesopotamia in the middle of summer. That in China, it snowed in August. In Rome, the Tiber froze early. Everywhere, the seasons are misbehaving, and everyone agrees the sun has lost its power. A quirky tidbit from the Byzantine world, people began to fear mirrors during this time. Not because of vanity, but because reflections in dim light took on a strange hue. Faces looked pale, stretched. Some claimed they saw the dead in the glass. Mirrors were covered or removed from homes entirely, just in case. You spend more time indoors now, not because it's cozy, it's not, but because being outside under that sickly sky makes you feel small, vulnerable, like something is watching. You light candles during the day just to see what you're doing. You save precious tallow and rushlight stubs, use them only when needed, and still curse the shadows. Even animals seem unsettled. Dogs howl more. Cows give less milk. Chickens lay fewer eggs. Birds migrate in the wrong direction or not at all. You spot a flock of geese circling overhead, honking in confusion, refusing to land. You once asked the village priest why the sun had dimmed. He looked skyward and said, "Perhaps God has turned his face away." You didn't ask again. One morning, you think it's fog. You step outside expecting to find dew and soft mist. But the air smells burnt, like sulfur and wet charcoal. And the haze never lifts. It isn't fog. It's just the world now. A ceiling of ash you can't clean. The children play less. They draw suns with sad little faces in the dirt, asking when the real one will come back. You wish you could tell them. And still, somehow life continues. You plant even when you know the yield will be pitiful. You gather what weeds you can. You barter with neighbors. You tell stories at night, mostly about the way things used to be. You don't say it aloud, but the truth hovers over every tale. You might be the last generation that remembers what a bright summer felt like. Somewhere, you hope the sun is still burning, still shining above the veil. But down here, it's a ghost. And deep inside, you wonder, what if this is the new normal? What if the sun never returns. You think you've seen hardship. You think you've felt the edge of desperation. But then comes the locusts. It starts quietly. Just a few strange-looking insects clinging to a wooden fence. Then more. Then clouds, actual clouds of them buzzing and writhing and blotting out what little sun there is. You've seen bad omens, but this feels like something biblical. You hear them before you see them. A faint, crackling hum, like distant fire. Then they're everywhere. In your fields, on your roof, swarming your goats sticking to your sleeves. You swat and scream and run, but they don't care. They've come for one thing, what's left of your food. Of course, there wasn't much left to begin with. But even the few shoots and scraps you've managed to coax from the stunted soil are gone in minutes. The locusts strip everything bare. Leaves, bark, sprouts. They even chew on rope and wool. Your neighbor finds a swarm in his attic eating the thatch. Historians still debate how widespread these infestations were in the late 530s, but contemporary accounts describe massive swarms across Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Europe. In some places, they were so dense that the sky turned dark. In others, they clogged rivers and wells after dying, turning clean water into a thick, black sludge. One quirky record from Egypt notes that entire palm groves vanished overnight. The scribes didn't even bother to record the crop losses, just the silence that followed, as if even words couldn't capture the ruin. You and your neighbors do what you can. You bang pots, wave blankets, light smoky fires. Some people try praying, others cursing. One man climbs onto his roof with a broom and shouts, "Go eat the Romans instead." The locusts ignore him. When they finally leave, if you can call it leaving, you're left in stunned silence. The fields are bare, the trees skeletal. Your garden looks like it was dragged through a fire. And worst of all, the few stores of grain and flour you had inside. Yeah, they got in there too. You check your sacks and find holes, larvae, the unmistakable scent of ruined food. You're not even sure what to throw out and what to risk eating. You've heard of people drying out the bugs and grinding them into meal. Protein, someone says. Survival food. You try not to gag. And now the fear truly settles in. You thought you were at the bottom, but the bottom just dropped out. Even the wild herbs you used to forage have been eaten. The bark's gone. The roots too. Animals are nervous. Your goat refuses to leave her shelter. The chickens huddle in corners silent. There's talk of a village further west where the people fought each other over a single sack of barley. Someone died. You don't know if it's true, but you believe it. You're past the point of embarrassment. You boil grass. You chew leather. You sneak into the forest and dig for anything that looks remotely edible. Once you try roasting mushrooms, you wake up hours later with a pounding head and no memory of the night. A strange irony sets in. The colder it gets, the less the rot spreads. The frost is your enemy, but also your preservative. What little food you manage to hide now lasts longer if you can keep it safe from the insects. You remember an old story someone told you about a king who faced locusts. He offered sacrifices, begged the gods, burned incense for 7 days. The locusts left. Did it work? Or were they just full? The priest says, "This is a test. Even Job was tested," he mutters. You want to believe him? But the smoke from burned harvests still hangs in your nose. Still, the human spirit is annoyingly resilient. You and your neighbors begin to gather what you can, digging deeper, trapping rats, mixing inedible roots with what little flour you have to stretch it further. Everything tastes wrong, but it keeps you moving. You start talking about spring again, even though no one believes in it anymore. You plan a planting schedule not because the soil's ready, but because hope demands rituals. If you stop planning for spring, you're not living. You're waiting to die. And you keep a stick in the corner sharpened. Not for wolves, not even for thieves. Just in case another swarm comes. You'll swing at the sky if you have to. Because that's what this year has taught you, it can always get worse. But as long as you're still breathing, you swing back. You sit in silence, staring at a cracked bowl of soup, if that's even the right word for it. It's hot water with a hint of onion, a scrap of turnip, and a single green thing that might have once been a leaf. It doesn't matter. It's warm, and that's more than most meals these days. But your mind isn't really on the soup. It's on what's missing from the table, on who's missing. Death used to be an event, a moment, a bell rung, a shroud drawn. Now it's background noise, like wind or coughing, or the creak of a roof beam giving way under snow. It's always there. People don't scream anymore when someone dies. They exhale as if relieved. One less mouth to feed, one less soul to worry about. You've started keeping track without meaning to. The boy who used to chase chickens gone. The old woman who could cure anything with a poultice and a whisper buried last week. You remember when the village had over 100 people. You count now maybe 60, and dropping. Historians still argue about the death toll during this time. Some say it was the worst demographic collapse since the Bronze Age. Others are more conservative. But from where you're sitting, numbers don't mean much. A single empty chair is more than enough. Graves are getting shallower. You try to dig deep, but the ground is frozen most mornings, and your hands blister easily. Some people don't bother anymore. They pile rocks over the body, mutter a prayer, and walk away. It's not disrespect, it's exhaustion. There's a kind of ritual now. Someone gets sick. They stop showing up for water. Someone checks on them. If they're still breathing, they leave a little food. If not, they find a cloth and a wheelbarrow. No ceremony, just movement. Quiet and grim. Children ask fewer questions now. That's the hardest part. They used to cry to tug on your sleeve to beg for explanations. Now they just nod when someone's missing. They've learned. Too fast. You try to keep memories alive. You tell stories around the fire about the way your father used to dance when the rains came. About your sister's awful singing voice. About the neighbor who once built a sled for a goat just to see if it would work. It did briefly. The goat was unimpressed. You make people laugh, and for a moment it feels like the world isn't falling apart. But grief doesn't sleep. It waits behind your thoughts, ready to drag its cold fingers down your spine at the slightest pause. You find yourself speaking aloud to the dead, catching your breath when you realize no one is there to answer. And then there's the dreams. They come harder now, more vivid. You dream of summer fields of sunlight so bright it hurts of laughter echoing through open windows. You wake up in the dark, disoriented, and remember where you are, when you are. You cry quietly into your blanket. A quirky historical note during this period, dream journals from monasteries became more frequent. Monks recorded visions of fire raining from the sky of oceans, boiling of angels weeping. Some believed they were prophetic. Others thought it was just moldy bread. You can relate. You've stopped asking for miracles. Now you ask for small things: a dry log, a warm bowl, a night without nightmares. You pray to gods you barely believe in just in case they're listening. And somehow, life keeps inching forward. The village begins to form new rhythms. People help each other more, not out of kindness, out of necessity. If your neighbor dies who helps you chop firewood, who trades you a spoonful of lard for your last potato, cooperation isn't a virtue. It's a survival strategy. There's an old man who's taken it upon himself to remember the names of everyone we've lost. He carves them into a wooden board outside the chapel. He's running out of space. The priest still rings the bell, but softer now. He says it's to avoid disturbing the sick. You think it's because even he can't bear the sound anymore. And you somehow keep going. You get up. You walk. You eat what you can. You bury what needs burying. You laugh sometimes, though it feels like betrayal. But the laughter is real. And so is the grief. They exist side by side now, like barn cats sharing the same beam. This isn't how the world ends. It's how it fades, slowly, quietly, with fewer voices and more silence. And yet you live. You're still here. And in this world, that's more than most can say. You're sitting on a log, chewing a piece of dried root that's doing a convincing impression of old leather. When you hear it again, voices raised. Not in anger, not even in song, but in debate, which in this world is practically music. It's the scholars again. A few still travel, believe it or not. Ragged men in patched cloaks with ink-stained fingers and scrolls tied to their belts like weapons. They pass through your village maybe once a season, staying just long enough to rest, eat, and stir up philosophical trouble. You love it. They argue about the sun, what caused the dimming. One insists it was divine punishment for human pride. Another claims it was dust from the east kicked up by angry winds and greedy kings. A third, quieter man mumbles something about fire from inside the earth, but everyone ignores him. Too boring, they say. Not mystical enough. Historians today would kill for these debates. Back then, knowledge wasn't just a luxury. It was survival. The people who understood medicine, astronomy, farming patterns, they were priceless and vulnerable. A clever scholar who could predict a frost might be welcomed as a sage, or blamed for it as a sorcerer. You remember one who came through last year. He had theories about the moon's color, about the sun's sickness. He spoke of celestial alignments and natural cycles. You didn't understand most of it, but his certainty was comforting. Then he said the cold might last another 5 years, and someone threw a turnip at him. In fairness, it was the last edible one in the village. Today's visiting scholar carries a wax tablet and lets the children draw on it, laughing when they press too hard. He tells stories of Alexandria's ruined libraries, of lost knowledge of books that once held cures, maps, poems. Some monks, he says, are trying to copy everything they can before it vanishes forever. He fears they won't be fast enough. You ask him what happened to the world. He smiles sadly. No one agrees. That's how you know it's serious. Historians still argue about the long-term intellectual cost of this era. Some say we lost centuries of progress. Others believe it was more of a detour than a dead end. But in your world, it's not a theory, it's a loss you can feel. No more schoolmasters. No more parchment traders. No more books read aloud by candlelight. The local priest used to read Latin psalms. Now he mostly hums. You suspect he's forgotten half the words. A quirky tale, one region in Britannia built a small shrine out of old scrolls, believing the ink would protect them from sickness. It didn't, but their attempt to weaponize wisdom, admirable. You start collecting what knowledge you can. Recipes, plant names, remedies passed down by whispers. You scratch them into wood, press them into clay, repeat them to children as lullabies, not for glory, for continuity, because stories and knowledge are fragile, and the darkness isn't just swallowing crops and people, it's swallowing memory. You begin to dream of fire not just for warmth, but for light, for clarity. You want to see clearly again, not just the world, but the ideas inside it. You want someone to explain the sky, the sickness, the swarming insects, not with guesses, but with truth. But truth in these years is rationed thinner than bread. Still, you listen to the scholars, even when they argue in circles, even when they admit they don't know. Because the act of seeking answers, that's its own kind of rebellion. Your neighbor says it's foolish to waste time with questions when there's no food. But you think it's the only thing that feels human anymore, wondering, thinking beyond survival. And every time a scholar leaves, your village feels dimmer, like they take some of the fire with them. So you start writing your own thoughts. Charcoal on bark, scratch bone, mud tablets left to dry in the sun when the sun bothers to show up. You write about the stars, about hunger, about the strange dreams that come in the longest nights. You don't know if anyone will read them, but you write anyway, because the scholars may be wandering, but the mind still burns. The snow crunches under your boots as you follow a familiar trail through the woods, though it's barely spring. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was still January. But the trees are confused. Buds appear only to shrivel, and the birds that should be back are either missing or oddly silent. You glance up at the gray sky and wonder for the 100th time if it'll ever turn blue again. Centuries from now, scientists will dig into the ice deep in Greenland and Antarctica. They'll pull out long frozen cylinders called ice cores, each packed with tiny bubbles of ancient air. They'll examine the layers like tree rings, looking for clues about the Earth's past. And in every core around the year 536, they'll find the same thing, a thick band of volcanic sulfur. That band will tell them what you already know. Too well, something massive and fiery shook the world. It didn't just cover the sun, it poisoned the air, cooled the planet, and shattered normal life for years. Of course you don't know that now. You just know that the cold won't end, the sky won't clear, and the land won't yield. You remember a scholar saying that ice records everything, that each layer of snow compresses into a page in the world's diary. You wish someone had written a warning before all this happened. Don't plant beans in 537. Don't trust the thaw. Stay near fire. And for the love of everything, save your grain. But warnings don't matter when the sky goes quiet. You make your way to a stream, more a trickle now, and dip your hand in. It's icy cold, painful, even in the thaw. You cup some water drink and taste something faintly metallic. The scholar claimed it's from the ash, still falling invisible now, but always there. In the soil, in the air, in you. Historians today use those ice core sulfur spikes to date eruptions, huge ones, the kind that blacken skies for years. And sure enough, Two enormous ones show up, just 4 years apart, one around 536, the next in 540. As if one volcanic punch to the face wasn't enough, the planet got hit again before it could even get back up. That second eruption, it turns out, might have been worse. It reignited the cooling, extended the famine, and helped spread the great plague that would follow. You're living through that second blow now. You thought things were improving, slightly warmer days, less coughing, a few green shoots. Then came another cold snap, another dead patch in the field, another wave of sickness, and so hope shrinks again. A quirky discovery one ice core shows that sulfur levels after 536 were higher than after the famed Krakatoa explosion in 1883. That means what you're living through. It's not just bad. It's historic, epic, cataclysmic. But you'd trade every future textbook for one solid harvest. Somewhere in the distance, someone's burning wood. The smoke drifts in thick and sour. You follow it to a clearing where a family has built a makeshift kiln trying to fire clay pots. They say it's for water storage, but you suspect they just want warmth. You help stack wood anyway. Anything to keep your hands busy. They talk about the old ways, when rains came on schedule, when bees still buzzed, when summer meant sweat and berries and the smell of warm earth. You listen nodding, but you barely remember. Those memories feel like someone else's dreams. Later, you sit by your own fire and look at a pine branch. Its growth rings are thinner than ever. A scholar once showed you how to count years in a tree. This one has lived through 7 winters, and each year is tighter, darker, harder, just like you. You wonder what kind of stories future people will tell. Will they know this was the year the sun disappeared, the year the world got cold and stayed that way? Will they read those ice cores and gasp? Or will they shrug and say, just one of many collapses? Historians still argue whether the eruptions were in Iceland, Central America, or somewhere else entirely. One theory says multiple volcanoes went off nearly at once, a global chain reaction. Another suggests a comet or meteor might have added to the chaos. No one agrees. But in your heart, you've stopped needing answers. You don't care where the ash came from. You care about whether your next planting will sprout, whether your child's cough will stop, whether next winter will kill the roof again. The earth remembers, the ice remembers, but you just try to forget enough to keep going. Still, when you wake at dawn and see a single ray of golden light break through the clouds, even for a moment, you let yourself believe. Maybe the worst has passed. The silence hits first. You walk into a village at the edge of the forest, one you've passed through before, where the smell of baking bread used to drift out in the early mornings, and the local smith always greeted you with a nod, even if he never remembered your name. But now, the smoke is gone. The doors are hanging open, and the only sound you hear is the creaking of a shutter tapping against a wall. You call out. No answer. The village isn't destroyed. There's no sign of fire or violence. It just looks forgotten. Tools left out to rust. Half-chopped logs scattered near the woodpile. A bucket overturned near the well, as if everyone left in a hurry, or didn't leave at all. You push open a door with your boot. Inside, dust dances in the shaft of pale light, filtering through a broken shutter. A pot still sits on the hearth, long cooled. Plates on the table. One chair tipped over. Historians would later call these ghost villages pockets of civilization simply abandoned, not due to war, but to slow attrition. Hunger, sickness, fear. Some families died out, others left hoping for better luck elsewhere. Some vanished between one frost and the next. A few chroniclers in Constantinople mention towns gone quiet whole stretches of road, where travelers encountered no living soul for days. One Syrian monk describes walking into a hilltop town where every house was locked from the inside. He left without touching anything. You poke through the houses gently. You're not there to loot. There's nothing worth taking, but you're looking for clues. A note, maybe. A scrap of a journal. Something that explains where they went. But there's nothing. Just the impression of lives interrupted. A quirky discovery archaeologists in Northern Europe have found towns with fields that were halfway planted then abandoned. Tools rusting in place. Livestock pens emptied, as if people thought they'd be back soon and never returned. You light a small fire outside, partly to warm your fingers, partly to signal you're here. But no one comes. The place remains eerily still. Back home, similar patterns are emerging. A farmstead down the road hasn't been heard from in weeks. A hamlet once famous for its cider now stands empty, its orchards withered. Your own village is holding on, but barely. Every few weeks, someone decides to try their luck elsewhere. They rarely write back. And yet, somehow, this slow unraveling feels more frightening than any single disaster. Because it's not dramatic. It's quiet. A slow dimming of the world's lights, one by one. Even trade has shifted. You used to meet travelers on the road. Now you count yourself lucky to see distant smoke. Caravans are smaller, guarded, suspicious. Markets that once bustled now resemble vigils, people whispering eyes darting haggling over shriveled onions like they're gold. And stories are changing too. There's a tale circulating now about a vanishing town in the hills. No bodies, just echoes. Some say it was cursed. Others think it froze over in a single night. You don't believe it. But still, you don't walk that road alone. Historians still argue what percentage of villages were abandoned during this period. Was it a true collapse or just a temporary retreat from centralized life? Were people dying in droves or simply scattering into smaller, more isolated groups? The truth is probably both. But what matters to you is the emptiness. The way the wind sounds louder when there's no one to talk to. The way fire crackles in a hearth that once hosted laughter. At night, when you lie awake, you imagine the world like a map with its lights slowly going out. Not all at once, not in flames, just fading. Sometimes you dream of rebuilding, of gathering the remaining villagers and moving into one of those empty towns, starting fresh, using their old beams, their unused hearths. But then you remember they left for a reason. Maybe you'd just be the next ghosts. So instead, you stay. You mend what you can. You keep the fire lit. You tell stories to the children, even if they've heard them all before. Because if the world is forgetting itself, someone has to remember. You carve a small sign on the way out of the empty village. Not a name, not a warning, just a single word, dear. Because they were. It's hard to believe it at first, but you hear it again and again from travelers and traders and tattered messengers, braving the dangerous roads. There's plague in the cities. The kind that spreads faster than fire, faster than locusts, faster than fear. And worse, it's not local. It's everywhere. It starts in the ports, they say, in cities like Pelusium and Alexandria. Then it sweeps into Constantinople, like a shadow at noon devouring whole neighborhoods. One man, falls sick at dawn and is dead before dusk. Another walks into the bathhouse and never walks out. Bodies stack up in the alleyways like cordwood, and still more come. They call it the Justinian plague, now named for the emperor who ruled during its peak. But you don't know that name yet. You just know what people whisper in market stalls, and behind shuttered doors, a sickness with black swellings, with fever, with coughing and bleeding and screams, and no cure. Historians still argue whether it was truly the first wave of bubonic plague, the same bacterium that would devastate Europe centuries later. The symptoms match buboes, rapid death mass graves, but some scholars debate how it spread so wide so fast. Was it rats, fleas, ships, air, or something worse? You don't care. You just want it to stay far, far away. But it doesn't. It trickles outward like a slow poison, from cities to towns, from towns to hamlets, until even in your little village, tucked between half-dead trees and frost-bitten fields, you hear of a man who collapsed in the woods, pale, cold, dead before he hit the ground. You don't touch his body. No one does. The priest prays from 20 feet away, and then the fear changes. Before you feared the sky, the cold, the hunger. Now you fear each other. People avoid the well when others are near. You hold your breath if someone coughs. No more communal bread ovens. No more shared tools. You wrap cloth over your face when walking to the market, even though you know it's more ritual than remedy. Still, it feels like armor. A quirky but horrifying detail. Some cities built massive trenches not just for the dead, but for the soon-to-be. In Constantinople, Emperor Justinian himself fell ill. He survived, but thousands didn't. Contemporary accounts claim the death toll reached 5,000 per day at the peak. Whether or not that's exaggerated, you believe it. You've seen how fast a sickness can move. Even monks and priests fall. Sanctuaries become silent. Bells go unrung. Scriptures unfinished. Your own village braces. You meet with the remaining elders and set rules: no visitors from outside unless they isolate first. Anyone showing symptoms must stay in their home. You try to build a sick hut, but no one volunteers to staff it. And then it hits. Not in waves, but in a quiet, suffocating fog. One woman stops showing up at the well. Her husband is next. A child develops a rash, then a fever. You do what you can: cool cloths, herbal tea, but it's like pouring water on a house fire. And the worst part, you don't even know if it is the plague. Everything looks like sickness now. Malnutrition, cold, despair. A sneeze causes panic. A limp turns into a funeral. Your own body becomes a mystery. Every ache, every twitch, every cough sends your mind spiraling. You convince yourself you're sick more times than you can count. Sometimes you wish you were just to end the suspense. You mark time by deaths. The days when someone dies, the days when no one does. You even start tracking the crows, convinced they gather more when it's close. And still somehow you survive. You build new habits. You boil everything. You bury your clothes in snow for a day if you've been near the sick. You wash your hands in ash when there's no soap. You burn sweet herbs hoping the smell drives off death. And one night, huddled beside the fire, you catch yourself laughing. Not out of joy, but disbelief. We've had the dark, the cold, the famine, and now this. You laugh harder until you're gasping. Then you cry. Then you fall asleep with tears drying on your cheeks. You dream of fire again, of a sun that doesn't hide, of warm hands and singing and faces not lost to fever. In the morning, The air smells cleaner. You light a candle for the ones who didn't make it. Then you get up and do what you've done every day since 5:36. You keep going. It takes you a moment to realize what's happening. There's a sound you haven't heard in months, maybe longer. Not wind, not coughing, not the rustle of dying leaves. No, this is different. This is water. Flowing, not trickling. Rushing even. You follow the sound to the stream near the edge of the village, and there it is real water, clear and lively, gushing between stones, like it remembers how to be a river again. It's not frozen. It's not stagnant. It's moving. You kneel down and dip your fingers in. It's still cold, sure, but not the kind of cold that hurts. It's the kind that makes your heart leap a little. The kind that reminds you of springs past, of renewal. You glance up. The sky, while still clouded, carries a different kind of light today. Not quite bright, but no longer the sickly yellow-gray either. You squint, and for just a heartbeat, you think you see a sliver of blue behind the haze. Could it be? Historians today believe that around the year 545, roughly a decade after the initial eruption, the climate began a slow, uneven recovery. Temperatures didn't suddenly bounce back, but seasons started to resemble themselves again, if not perfectly, then enough. Enough for fields to thaw. Enough for trees to bud. Enough for hope to creep out of hiding. You head back to the village faster than you meant to, a bounce in your step you didn't know your body remembered. People notice. You point toward the stream. They follow. That evening, there's a noise you haven't heard in you don't even know how long. Laughter. Small, quiet, uncertain, but real. A few children try to race sticks in the stream. Two older women collect water and gossip about someone's beard. You catch yourself smiling without guilt. A quirky observation: several 6th century monks describe signs in nature that marked the end of the worst years. One claims that bees returned early one spring and sang of salvation. Another wrote of an almond tree blooming overnight. Whether literal or poetic, the message was clear: something had shifted. It's not all better, of course. The famine isn't over. The plague still lurks in pockets. The fields remain fragile. But the sense of permanent decline has lifted just slightly. It feels like the world has stopped falling. You take a walk the next morning and notice things you've trained yourself to ignore: green shoots poking through mud birdsong that isn't mournful squirrels chasing each other like idiots. Even your goat bleats with more enthusiasm. The villagers begin to plan in earnest. Not survival plans, actual plans. The kind with futures in them. The blacksmith starts repairing broken plows. The children practice a maypole dance, even if they're not sure what it means. A few brave souls begin clearing the fields. You gather with others and talk about planting. Not if, but when. Someone suggests building a proper granary. Someone else mentions a wall just in case wolves come closer again. And no one laughs them off. These are the kinds of problems you want to have. You've lived so long in disaster mode that even cautious optimism feels radical. You still sleep with one eye open. You still check your skin each morning for signs of illness. But you also hum while fetching water. You catch yourself imagining what you'll grow. Turnips, maybe. Barley, if you're lucky. Carrots, if the gods are feeling generous. And with that shift in mood comes another surprise memory. Good ones. Not survival memories, but joy. You recall the way sunlight used to glint off your mother's copper pot, the way honey tasted when the bees were busy. The way your hands used to ache from weeding, but in a good way. The ache of effort, not desperation. Historians still debate whether this recovery was truly global or more regional. Did some places continue to suffer longer? Absolutely. But the consensus is that by the late 540s, most of the worst was over. Slowly, clumsily, painfully, life found a way to begin again. And so do you. You clean your house, not for hygiene, but for comfort. You mend your cloak, not because you have to, but because you care what it looks like again. You tie a ribbon in your hair and don't feel silly. And one night, for the first time in years, you don't dream of fire or famine. You dream of a table, full. And when you wake, you believe it might one day be real. The ground beneath your feet feels different now, not quite warm, but no longer frozen. When you press your fingers into the earth, it gives just enough to hold a seed. And that's exactly what you do. One by one, you place them in the soil. Barley, peas, turnips, anything that stands a chance. You water them with a cracked jug and whisper something halfway between a prayer and a threat. Grow. Or else. This isn't the first time you've tried planting since the dark years began. But this is the first time you believe it might work. Others are doing the same. Plots once left fallow out of despair now bloom with quiet ambition. The village green, once a place of ash and fear, sprouts tiny rows of hope. Children chase away crows. Old men build scarecrows with crooked arms and straw-stuffed smiles. Even the chickens seem confused by the sudden optimism. It's planting season again, not just in soil, but in minds. A quirky revival. Some villagers begin reintroducing rituals that hadn't been seen since before the skies dimmed. A spring dance, a garland contest. Someone carves a new maypole, even though no one's quite sure how tall it's supposed to be. Doesn't matter. The point is you're doing something other than surviving. Historians still argue over the long-term recovery of the 540s. Did populations bounce back quickly, or was it a generational climb? Were villages like yours outliers, or were there thousands across Europe doing exactly what you're doing now? Rebuilding. You don't care much about the scholarly debate. You care about weeds. Weeds mean warmth. And warmth means growing things. That's all the data you need. Still, not everything is easy. The soil's exhausted after years of frost and erosion. The ash lingers in places, souring the roots. You use compost fish bones, even burnt straw, whatever it takes to coax life back out. Some crops fail outright. Others tease you with a few green shoots, only to wither in a late frost. But a few, just a few, start to hold. And that's enough. You spend more time outdoors now. Not because you have to gather or scavenge, but because you want to. The sun, though, still cautious, is stronger. You can feel it on your skin. It still doesn't burn the way it once did, but it warms. That's new. You find yourself watching the sky again, not in dread, but in curiosity. There are clouds shaped like things again, like animals, like memories. And then one morning, something absurd happens. You sweat. You're tending to a row of onions, muttering about spacing when a bead of moisture slides down your temple. You pause, wipe it, blink. Real sweat. You laugh. Then you cry. Then you laugh again. Others experience similar moments. Someone gets sunburned. Someone else complains it's too hot for soup. You make fun of them, of course. But secretly, it feels like a sacred moment. You go back to your planting. You sing even if you don't know the words anymore. You make up new ones. You sing about mud and bugs and stubborn carrots. You sing about hunger because it's still there, but also about full bellies, someday. And you're not alone. People begin talking about the future again, about rebuilding roads, reopening trade, teaching the children letters instead of just how to find edible moss. A scholar passes through and leaves behind a scroll. No one can read it yet, but someone's learning. You trade seeds with a nearby village, your barley for their broad beans. A risky journey, but one worth taking. On your return, you see new thatch on roofs, smoke curling from chimneys, in a way that says, cooking, not just burning. You begin measuring days by sun, not by sickness. You count the time between rainstorms, not between funerals. Historians now call this the beginning of recovery. Some even say the hardships of 536-545 reshaped civilization, that people adapted, restructured their societies, forged new paths forward. Maybe that's true. But to you, it's simpler. You planted something, and it grew. There's a knock at your door. It's not frantic or fearful, just a soft, steady knock, the kind you hear when someone's stopping by to talk, not to announce a crisis. That's rare. That's new. You open the door and see a face you haven't seen in years. He used to live 3 villages over before his home was abandoned. You'd heard he died. But here he is, thinner, grayer, but unmistakably alive. He smiles. Heard you've got peas in the ground. You laugh and wave him inside. Over shared stew, you actually have stew now, not just boiled roots. You swap stories. His village is rebuilding too. They've cleared the old churchyard. The river is running again. Children play outside. He even brought a gift, a handful of dried herbs and a crude carving of a goat. It's ugly. You love it. The conversation shifts from the past to the possible. He mentions travel trade routes, even building a new bridge. You talk about teaching the young ones how to read again. The idea of reading seems absurdly luxurious and exciting. Historians describe this kind of moment as early social reintegration. People daring to rebuild the connections that catastrophe frayed. One record from Gaul mentions the reformation of small market fairs, tiny at first, with mostly barter goods, but growing, not just in size, in hope. You start to see these changes around you too. A boy with a flute practices under a tree. Someone begins building a cart from salvaged planks. A young woman paints symbols on stones, not religious, just beautiful. You feel it, the cautious return of culture. You find yourself wanting to celebrate. You propose a feast, modest, of course. Boiled barley root vegetables and the last dried meat in the storeroom. Nothing fancy. But it's not about the food. It's about gathering. Word spreads quickly. People offer what they can, turnip songs, a cracked drum. Someone found a bit of honey and guards it like gold. You hang herbs in the gathering space, not for medicine, but for scent. When the evening arrives, it feels surreal. There are candles lit, not because of sickness, but for ambiance. Music plays, not funerary chants, but clumsy melodies and laughter. Someone tells a story that's not a warning, not a survival guide, just a joke. You laugh until your stomach hurts. Not because things are perfect. They're not. But because for the first time in nearly a decade, they're not terrible. A quirky revival, you discover a strange new dance. No one knows where it came from. Probably a blend of old traditions and new improvisations, but it catches on. People stomp spin sway awkwardly. The children call it sun calling. You suspect it's half mocking, but who cares? It's movement. it's joy. The next day, you see signs of something even rarer than warmth or crops renewal. Someone is digging foundations, not graves homes. Someone else sketches plans for a mill wheel, though you're not sure if they've ever seen one work. The idea matters more than the engineering. Historians still debate how fast people psychologically recovered from the 536 catastrophe. Was it immediate after the worst years, or a slow crawl over generations? But in your village, you see it plain as day. People are beginning to think ahead, not just sideways. You make a list on a scrap of bark tools to rebuild books to copy. If you ever find them songs to teach the children, you title it Things to Remember. It's your way of telling the future. We came through it, and this is what we carried with us. There's still ash in the soil, still cold nights, still news of sickness far away. But they don't stop you. Not anymore. You've learned how to endure. And now you're remembering how to live. As you look out over the fields, green and hopeful, you say to no one in particular, we're still here. And this time, the world feels ready to answer back. Your fingers are calloused, your knees stained with earth, and your back hums with the kind of pain that comes from work, not from illness or starvation or digging graves, but honest, exhausting work. And you'd never trade it for anything. You're in the fields again, not scavenging, but tending. You pause beside a sprouting line of barley, brushing the leaves gently like you would a sleeping child. The sun, yes, actual sun is warm on your shoulders. You squint, and it doesn't hurt. It just feels right. You've started tracking seasons again. Not by disasters or deaths, but by rhythms, planting, growing, harvesting. You notice birds returning the kind with songs you haven't heard since you were a child. One even builds a nest above your door. You let it stay. You meet with other villagers weekly now, not to share grief or divide rations, but to plan. You talk about repairing the old road that once connected you to the coast, about redigging the canal that collapsed 5 winters ago. Someone suggests holding a summer festival, a real one. Historians mark these years as a period of transition, not quite a golden age, not a full recovery, but a shift. The old world ravaged and dimmed by ash, and fear doesn't come back exactly, but a new world forms resilient, adapted, determined to thrive. You see that shift in the smallest things. The way the local weaver starts dyeing her cloth again. The way someone adds a sprig of mint to a stew, not for necessity but for flavor. The way children start carving toys instead of makeshift traps. A quirky village custom emerges, planting lucky weeds. Dandelions, clover, even nettles, anything green that grows where it shouldn't. People say it's a charm against darkness. You don't care if it's true. You do it anyway. Your home, once patched and sagging, now has a new door. You carved it yourself with a tiny sun at the center. Every time it creaks open, it feels like you're stepping into possibility. And now, visitors are returning. Messengers from other towns. Traders with carts full of oddities, glass beads, salted fish news. A monk with ink-stained robes offers to copy a scroll for food and a warm place to sleep. You give him both. He reads by firelight that evening, muttering Latin phrases none of you fully understand. Still, it feels important, like magic rediscovered. You start thinking of things in terms of next year. Next year we'll have more sheep. Next year we'll try barley on the north slope. Next year we'll rebuild the school. The word next used to feel dangerous. Now, it feels like a promise. One evening, the scholar who once warned of famine returns. This time, he carries seeds. You ask him why he came back. He shrugs. Wasn't ready to stop hoping, and neither are you. There's talk of reuniting with a distant city, not just for supplies, but for ideas. Maybe trade routes can reopen. Maybe libraries can be rebuilt. Maybe someone somewhere has written a record of all this. The dark sky, the silence, the fire, and sent it forward for others to read. Historians will one day dig up those records. They'll analyze tree rings, ice cores, ash layers. They'll name this period the Late Antique Little Ice Age. They'll marvel at how people survived it, how they kept planting, kept writing, kept loving even when the sun forgot how to shine. But you just keep planting. You place another seed in the soil and cover it gently with dirt. Not because you're sure it'll grow, but because it might. And that's enough. The village looks nothing like it did 10 years ago, and yet everything about it feels familiar again. The smell of fresh bread, the distant clang of iron from the forge, the buzz of bees somewhere just beyond the garden wall. Even your shadow seems sharper, more real. The light has changed. It doesn't just hover anymore. It settles confidently, like it belongs. You're older now, of course. You wear the years like layers. Scars laugh lines the particular ache in your hip when the wind changes. But there's a weight that's lifted, a kind of tired that's finally, blissfully not from fear. You walk the rebuilt main path, once a rutted muddy strip, and pass families tending gardens, young ones learning how to use a plow, elders sharing stories beneath the awning of the new meeting hall. You even see a child drawing suns on a slate board. Suns. You grin like a fool. And then something truly astonishing happens. Rain, but not the icy sideways slush that used to sting your skin like needles. Not the apocalyptic storms that made rivers rage and roofs collapse. No, this is gentle, rhythmic, the kind of rain that soaks the earth without scaring it, the kind you can smell before it falls like wet stone and wild thyme. You stand in it, arms out, face up, mouth open. You're not alone. Others come out too. A child dances in puddles. A dog howls with joy. An old woman says it smells like the rains we used to know. It's a moment no one dares speak over. Historians today would see this as symbolic, whether true or apocryphal moments like these appear in surviving letters and oral histories. The rain that came when we almost forgot what it was, the planting that finally took the season that gave more than it took away. You sit later under a makeshift awning, watching the drops pattern the dirt into polka dots. Someone hands you a cup of nettle tea. There's even a sliver of bread and cheese. Luxury. The conversation turns to strange things. Philosophy, dreams, the stars. One young boy says he wants to be a traveler to see where the light ends. Someone else laughs and tells him to bring back a rock from the edge. Make sure it glows. You all chuckle, but you write that down later, just in case. A quirky moment, a peddler arrives with a box of mirrors. Actual mirrors, cracked but precious. You catch your reflection for the first time in years. You gasp, not because of how you've aged, but because you recognize yourself again. You see strength there, and memory, and a spark you'd almost forgotten. A mural begins to take shape on the chapel wall, a collective project. Each person adds something. A bird, a tree, a face. It's rough and uneven and utterly beautiful. One corner has a black spiral representing the year of ash, but next to it, a sprouting seed, a rising sun. Historians still debate how long it truly took for society to bounce back. Did the plague linger? Did famines persist in pockets? Of course, recovery was not a clean line. It zigged, zagged, tripped over itself. But in countless places, quietly and steadily life resumed. And it wasn't just about surviving. It was about choosing to rebuild. To make things not as they were, but as they could be. You help plan a small journey just to the next valley, but it feels like an expedition. To trade, to greet, to carry stories and bring back new ones. You pack carefully seeds, scrolls, flint, and a small carving of the sun. A symbol. You leave at dawn. Others wave. The children run beside you until the gate. As you crest the hill and look back, your village glows. Not with grandeur, not with riches, but with light. You return to the village beneath a sky so blue, it almost looks artificial, like someone took the color from your oldest memory and painted it across the heavens just to make you cry. And you do cry quietly as you cross the old bridge and see the rooftops shimmering in the early light. There are more of them now, rooftops, that is. New houses, new lives. The valley sings with sounds that had once vanished entirely. The clatter of carts, the whistle of a potter shaping clay, the unfiltered giggles of children who've never known true hunger. You walk the market square and see fresh loaves, for sale herbs laid out like bouquets, candles molded with pressed flowers, and someone proudly displaying shoes with actual matching soles. They're charging 2 onions for them. Pricey, but worth it. Even your reflection in the well water startles you. Not because of the wrinkles or white hairs, but because you look like someone who belongs in this world again, like someone who endured, not just survived. And yet, underneath all this renewal, there's a subtle undercurrent remembering. You pass the wall beside the chapel, where someone has etched the names of those who didn't make it. It wraps around like a quiet ribbon of grief and honor. Someone's added flowers at the base. You do too. That evening, there's a gathering, nothing fancy, just music, stew, laughter. Someone reads aloud from a scroll. The children don't fidget. They listen. And when the story ends, they beg for another. You think about what it took to reach this point, a world plunged into shadow, a planet cooled by ash, a sun that vanished, plague, panic, silence, and then slowly light. You remember how long it took just to laugh without guilt, to sing without fear, to believe that planting wasn't foolish optimism. You remember standing in fields of nothing, and now you walk past fields of green. Historians still debate the causes of the catastrophe. Was it the Rabaul caldera, the Ilopango eruption in Central America, or something lost entirely to history? The arguments go on. But you here now, you don't need to argue. You lived it. You bore witness to a world unraveling, and then watched awestruck as people stitched it back together with threadbare hope and calloused hands. You know the truth of 536. It was darkness, and it passed. In the flicker of the firelight, someone raises a cup carved wood, smoothed from years of handling, and says softly, to those who kept going. And you raise yours too, to those who kept going. Because in the end, that's the legacy. Not the ash, not the cold, not even the rebuilding. It's the stubbornness. The refusal to go quietly. The seed planted when the sky was still gray. And when you lie down that night, listening to the hum of insects, the rustle of wind in healthy trees, the sound of your own steady breath, you finally fully sleep. And now, as you drift further into stillness, The world softens around you. The earth, once hard and unforgiving, feels warm beneath your feet. The wind no longer stings, it carries stories. The trees no longer groan under frost, they sway gently with memories of survival. You walk the familiar path home under a moon that no longer hides its silver glow, resting quietly on rooftops, fields, and faces. You're not afraid anymore. The ash is gone. The sun has returned. The fire crackles not with desperation, but with peace. And the quiet is no longer hollow. It's comforting. A lullaby carried on a breeze. You tuck yourself in beneath a blanket that smells of lavender and old wood smoke. The walls of your home don't creak. From collapse, they breathe with life. And outside, someone hums. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe a ghost. It doesn't matter. The melody is familiar, and it guides you gently toward dreams. You close your eyes. The darkness behind your lids isn't frightening. It's restful. And from within it, a spark glows. Not fire, not fear, but light, the kind that comes after long, hard winters. The kind you've earned. You survived the worst year in history. And now you rest